A 6-year-old named Isabella walks to the front of her kindergarten classroom, sits cross-legged on the rug, places her palms on her knees and starts tapping her thumbs to her fingers one by one, whispering, "I am calm now," and every single one of her classmates follows her lead, the whole room going quiet. That's not a scene from a mindfulness retreat. That's a real classroom at Chatsworth Elementary in Larchmont, New York. Today, we're getting into Breathe Like a Bear, a children's book by Kira Willey that's become a go-to tool for parents and teachers trying to help kids manage big emotions. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what makes this book different, why breathing exercises actually work on a biological level, and what the research says about bringing mindfulness into kids' everyday lives. Joining me to dig into all of this is someone who's been deep in the research. What is this book, really?
So Breathe Like a Bear is a 96-page illustrated collection of 30 mindfulness exercises published by Rodale Kids back in December 2017. It's written by Kira Willey and illustrated by Ani Betts, and it's aimed at kids roughly ages 3 to 6, preschool through 3rd grade. The whole premise is that these breathing practices and movements are short, simple, and can be done anywhere, in the car, at a school desk, during a stressful homework night at home.
Anywhere. That's a big claim.
It is, but that's actually the design philosophy behind it. Most people assume mindfulness requires a quiet room, a yoga mat, some kind of dedicated space. This book flips that. It's built for the chaos of real family life. And it's not coming out of nowhere. It's based on Kira Willey's Parents' Choice Gold Award-winning CD called Mindful Moments for Kids. So there's already an established audience that responded to her approach before the book even existed.
Oh, interesting. So the book is almost like a visual companion to something that was already working.
Exactly. And the Focused Education Resource Evaluation, which assessed it for K through 4 classrooms, describes it as providing 30 different breathing techniques accompanied by colorful images and playful animals. That combination of visuals and animals is deliberate. It makes the exercises accessible and non-threatening for young kids. You're not asking a 5-year-old to meditate. You're asking them to breathe like a bear in hibernation, or blow on imaginary hot chocolate.
Okay, that's actually kind of genius. Because if you tell a kid to calm down, that never works. But if you say, breathe like a bear, suddenly there's something to do.
That's the whole insight. And it connects to something Mindtastic's editorial team put really well. A useful mindfulness book for children gives the child something to do, not just something calm to hear. The book is the doorway. The repeated practice is the skill.
I love that framing. The book is the doorway. So before we get into the science of why this works, let's just ground people in what mindfulness even means in this context, because it gets thrown around a lot.
Right. So the most cited definition comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's widely recognized as the father of contemporary medically based mindfulness. He developed a therapeutic practice called mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and he defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. That's it. That's the whole thing.
On purpose, present moment, non-judgmentally. That's deceptively simple.
It is. And the Child Mind Institute builds on that by explaining that for kids specifically, the goal is to give them enough distance from disturbing thoughts and emotions to be able to observe them without immediately reacting. So instead of a meltdown, there's a pause. Instead of a tantrum, there's a breath. One mindfulness coach they quote describes it as helping kids find their still, quiet place. And from there, she says, they can learn to observe their thoughts and feelings and begin to choose their behaviors.
Choose their behaviors. That's a really different way of thinking about it compared to just calming down.
Completely different. Calming down is passive. Choosing your behavior is a skill. And that's what makes this relevant for kids with ADHD, anxiety, autism, depression. The Child Mind Institute specifically calls those out as populations where mindfulness has shown real benefits. It's not just for kids who are already doing fine.
So it's not a wellness luxury, it's more like a coping tool.
Exactly. And that distinction matters a lot when you're thinking about how to use something like Breathe Like a Bear. It's not just a nice bedtime ritual, though it can be that too. It's a functional skill-building resource.
Okay, so let's talk about the science, because I think a lot of people hear breathing exercises for kids and think it's a bit soft, you know? Like, is there actual research behind this?
There really is, and it's more concrete than people expect. Let's start with the physiology. When a child is anxious or overwhelmed, their breathing becomes shallow and rapid. That's the body signaling a threat. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response kicking in. According to mindful teachers, slow breathing directly activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system that promotes calmness and emotional balance. So you're not just distracting the kid, you're literally changing what's happening in their nervous system.
Wait, so the breathing is doing something biological, not just psychological?
Both, actually. Research cited by mindful teachers shows that slow, rhythmic breathing reduces cortisol levels, that's the stress hormone, and stabilizes heart rate variability, both of which are directly linked to stress regulation. For kids, that translates into fewer emotional spikes and quicker recovery from distress. And Coping Skills for Kids describes it as getting the body from flight, fight, or freeze mode back to rest and digest mode. Deep breathing gets more oxygen into the bloodstream, which has a measurable physical calming effect.
Rest and digest. I've never heard it put that way, but that's such a clear way to explain it.
It really is. And there's classroom-level research backing this up too. A study by Butzer and colleagues in 2015 looked at second and third graders doing a 10-week school yoga program, which includes breathing practices, and found that students showed lower cortisol levels after cognitive stress tasks. Second graders even had reduced baseline cortisol. Teachers also reported improved self-regulation and behavior. So the effects are measurable and observable, not just self-reported.
Lower cortisol in second graders. That's not nothing.
Not at all. And a meta-analysis by Zugman and colleagues in 2014 looked at youth-focused mindfulness programs broadly and found small but significant improvements overall, with the strongest results in clinical populations. Benefits included reduced anxiety, depression, and emotional reactivity. So the evidence base is real, even if it's still growing.
And this is where I want to bring in something that I think really puts the stakes in perspective. Because we're not talking about kids who are just a little stressed. The numbers on youth anxiety are actually pretty alarming.
Yeah, and this is where the context really matters. According to Mindful magazine, 25% of 13 to 18-year-olds will experience an anxiety disorder, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health. And a survey of 22,000 high school students conducted by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence found that, on average, students reported feeling negative emotions, stress, fatigue, boredom 75% of the time.
75% of the time. That's 3/4 of their waking hours feeling bad.
And the American Academy of Pediatrics has noted that early stress levels can negatively impact learning, memory, behavior, and both physical and mental health. So when we're talking about teaching a 3-year-old to breathe like a bear, we're actually talking about early intervention for something that compounds over time if it's not addressed.
That reframes it completely. It's not acute activity, it's preventive.
Preventive is exactly the right word. And Dr. Sarah Ruiz, a pediatric psychologist at Rady Children's Health, makes a really important point about what's driving this. She says, and I'm quoting here, "I've noticed this a lot more with social media and the news. Kids pick up on little things from the news or hear about it from social media, and then they can really get stuck on it, just wondering what's going to happen next. So the stressors kids are dealing with now are genuinely different from previous generations."
And younger kids are absorbing that ambient anxiety even if they can't articulate it.
Right. Dr. Ruiz describes how, for younger children, chronic stress shows up as increased crankiness, tiredness, or constant questioning and seeking reassurance. So a book like Breathe Like a Bear is meeting kids where they actually are, not where we wish they were.
Okay, so let's talk about how this actually plays out in schools, because the Chatsworth Elementary story you mentioned at the top, that's a real example of this working in a classroom setting. What does that look like?
So at Chatsworth Elementary in Larchmont, New York, teacher Liz Slade has her kindergartners do a mindfulness ritual when they come back from lunch and recess, which is notoriously a chaotic transition. She asks a mindful leader to come to the front of the class. And that day, it was Isabella, a 6-year-old, who sat cross-legged on the rug and led the whole class through tapping their thumbs to their fingers while repeating, "I am calm now," gradually lowering their voices until the room went quiet.
And the teacher's quote about that moment is so good.
Slade said, "They are learning the experience of settling their body. What used to be a wild time now becomes a charming, sweet moment when we all take a pause and come back to being present." And Chatsworth is described as one of thousands of schools bringing mindfulness into the classroom. This isn't a fringe experiment.
And what I find fascinating about Isabella specifically is that she's not just receiving mindfulness, she's modeling it. A 6-year-old is the one leading the room.
That's such a key observation. And it connects to something the WestEd brief on mindfulness in education points out, that mindfulness is complemented to social emotional learning, or SEL. Both are focused on helping young people understand and regulate their internal life. When a kid like Isabella leads that ritual, she's not just calming herself down, She's building leadership, self-awareness, and community at the same time.
Okay, so how does Breathe Like a Bear specifically fit into that classroom context? Is it designed for teachers to use?
It is. The focused education evaluation specifically notes that in K through 4 classrooms, teachers can support social emotional learning with the book's collection of mindful moments for energy and relaxation. Teachers can guide students through the activities at various points throughout the school day or to support problem-solving strategies at school or home. So it's flexible enough to be a transition tool, a focus reset, or a wind-down activity.
And it's not just for schools. The whole anytime, anywhere thing is a real design feature.
Completely. The book explicitly mentions using it in the car to the grocery store, during heavy homework nights at home, or at a child's desk at school. That portability is intentional. And Mindtastic's guide makes a point that parents usually reach for mindfulness books during familiar pinch points: bedtime, worry before school, focus struggles, anger after a sibling fight. Those are exactly the moments this book is designed for.
Anger after a sibling fight. That's so specific and so real.
Right? And the techniques themselves are designed to be playful. Doing Good Together describes the book as using imaginative play to teach children the tenets of guided meditation in age-appropriate ways, whether that's pretending to be a bear in hibernation or blowing on hypothetical hot chocolate. The imagination is doing the work of making the breathing feel natural rather than clinical.
That's a really smart pedagogical move. You're not saying do diaphragmatic breathing. You're saying blow on your hot chocolate so it doesn't burn your tongue.
Exactly. And that connects to what Very Special Tales points out about teaching breathing to kids. You have to make it fun enough that it becomes an enjoyable activity on its own. Because the goal is for kids to reach for it when they're upset. And they'll only do that if they've practiced it when they're calm. You can't introduce a breathing technique in the middle of a meltdown and expect it to work.
Oh, that's a really important practical point. You have to build the habit before you need it.
That's the whole thing. And Mindtastic is very clear about this. One reading is rarely enough. Children often need the same phrase, the same chair, the same 2-minute practice before it starts to feel familiar. Repetition is what turns a book into a skill.
So it's not a one and done. You can't just read it once at bedtime and call it done.
Not at all. And Mindtastic is also careful to note that mindfulness books are supportive tools, not clinical treatment for persistent anxiety, insomnia, or behavior concerns. That's an important caveat. This is a complement to other support, not a replacement for it.
That's a responsible distinction to make, because I think there's a risk of overpromising what a book can do.
Absolutely. And the research reflects that nuance too. The Zugman meta-analysis found the strongest results in clinical populations, kids who were already struggling. So mindfulness isn't a magic fix, but it's a genuinely useful tool, especially when it's introduced early and practiced consistently.
Let me ask you something that I think a lot of parents might be wondering. Is there a right age to start this? Like, can a 3-year-old actually do this?
The book is designed for ages 3 to 6, and that's actually well supported by the research. Mindtastic points out that age fit matters more than popularity. A book that works for a 9-year-old might completely miss a preschooler if the sentences are too long or the pictures don't guide the practice. Breathe Like a Bear is specifically built for that younger end, with colorful illustrations and animal characters doing the heavy lifting of explanation.
And the adult's role in all of this, because it's not like you hand a 3-year-old a book and walk away.
Right, adult participation is essential. Mindtastic is explicit about this. Read aloud books need adult participation. You pause after a breath cue, you try it yourself, you let the child answer with words, gestures, or silence. The adult modeling the exercise is part of what makes it work. And there's something kind of beautiful about that. It's a shared practice, not a solo one.
And actually, there's a broader cultural shift happening here too, right? Because it's not just kids who are turning to mindfulness.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting piece of context. According to the 2022 National Health Interview Survey, 17.3% of U.S. adults reported using meditation in the previous 12 months, according to NIH data cited by Mindtastic. So, a significant chunk of parents are already practicing this themselves. That makes it much more natural to bring home to kids. It's not something foreign or weird. It's something the adults in their lives are already doing.
So the family mindfulness practice that Breathe Like a Bear is trying to encourage isn't starting from zero for a lot of households.
Exactly. And the book explicitly frames itself as a way to encourage families to establish a fun and consistent mindfulness practice, whether at home or on the go. That word consistent is doing a lot of work there. It's not about one perfect session. It's about building something that becomes part of the rhythm of daily life.
Okay, I want to zoom out for a second. Because we've talked about the book, the science, the classroom applications, but I'm curious, is there any pushback on this? Like, are there people who think this is overhyped?
That's a fair question. And the honest answer is that the research, while promising, is still developing. The Weaver and Derrick review from 2015 analyzed 16 studies on yoga and mindfulness for kids with anxiety and found that nearly all showed reduced anxiety. But the authors also noted that inconsistent study designs made it hard to generalize findings across populations. So the evidence is real, but it's not airtight across every context.
So it's not a slam dunk for every kid in every situation.
Not universally. But the Khalsa and Butzer review of 47 peer-reviewed studies on yoga in school settings found broad support for it as a low-cost, effective intervention. And low cost is actually a really important part of that. A 96-page illustrated book is accessible in a way that therapy or specialized programs aren't always. That's part of why something like Breathe Like a Bear has traction. It's practical and affordable.
Low barrier to entry. You don't need a specialist. You just need the book and a willing adult.
And a little consistency. That's really the whole formula. The West Ed brief on mindfulness in education puts it well. Mindfulness is essentially the practice of cultivating attention to foster greater self-awareness and self-knowledge about thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and how they can affect one's actions. That's a lifelong skill. Starting it at age 3 with a bear breathing exercise is just the beginning of something much bigger.
And the advocate piece on mindfulness in elementary classrooms makes the point that for kids whose brains are still developing, these practices can lay a foundation for lifelong skills. So you're not just helping a kid get through a hard Tuesday, you're potentially shaping how they handle stress for the rest of their life.
That's the long game. And it's backed by brain research. The Advocate cites studies showing that mindfulness exercises can positively affect the brain's structure and function, particularly in areas associated with attention, emotion regulation, and behavior control. For a developing brain, that's significant.
Okay, so when you step back from everything we've covered, the book, the biology, the classroom stories, the research, what's the through line here? What does this all actually add up to?
I think the through line is this. Kids are carrying more stress than we often acknowledge, and they don't have the vocabulary or the tools to process it on their own. Something like Breathe Like a Bear works because it doesn't ask kids to understand their nervous system, it just gives them something playful to do with their body that happens to regulate it. The bear in hibernation isn't a metaphor for the parasympathetic nervous system, but it activates it anyway.
The bear in hibernation isn't a metaphor for the parasympathetic nervous system, but it activates it anyway. I love that.
And the other thing worth saying is that this isn't just about the kids. When a parent sits down with a 3-year-old and does a breathing exercise together, they're practicing too. Dr. Sarah Ruiz at Rady Children's Health talks about modeling calmness and resilience for kids, and that's exactly what happens when an adult participates in these exercises rather than just assigning them.
So the book is doing double duty. It's a tool for the kid and a prompt for the adult.
Exactly. And Little Yellow Star makes a point that I think is underrated. Reading a book together is itself an exercise in mindfulness, because you're slowing down, noticing each sentence and each illustration as the pages turn. So even the act of sitting down with Breathe Like a Bear is a mindful moment before you've even done a single breathing exercise.
That's a reframe I didn't expect. Storytime as mindfulness practice.
It really is. And I think that's what makes this book part of a larger movement rather than just a standalone product. It's part of a 7-book series called Mindfulness Moments for Kids. The infrastructure for building this as a consistent family or classroom practice is already there.
So here's what this really comes down to. We've got a generation of kids absorbing more ambient stress than ever, from school pressure, from social media, from the news, and the research is clear that early, consistent, playful mindfulness practice can actually change how their brains and bodies respond to that stress. Breathe Like a Bear is one entry point into that. It's not a cure, it's a doorway.
And the doorway matters. Because if a kid learns at age 4 that they can change how they feel by changing how they breathe, that's a tool they carry with them into every hard moment that follows. The Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence found that high school students feel negative emotions 75% of the time. Imagine if those same students had been practicing emotional regulation since kindergarten.
That's the real stakes of this conversation. It's not about one book. It's about what we're building in kids before the hard stuff hits.
And the beautiful thing is that it doesn't require a lot. A book, a consistent adult, a few minutes a day. The research from Butzer and colleagues showed measurable cortisol reduction in 2nd graders from a 10-week program. 10 weeks. That's not a lifetime commitment. That's a semester.
Okay, so if someone's listening to this and they want to actually do something with it, what's the most practical takeaway?
Practice it when things are calm. That's the number one thing. Very Special Tales makes this point clearly. You practice breathing techniques when your child is calm and happy, so they can actually use them when they're unsettled, angry, or worried. You can't introduce a new tool in the middle of a crisis. Build the habit first.
Build the habit first and do it with them, not just at them.
Do it with them. Model it. Let them see you take a slow breath when you're stressed. Because kids are watching everything. And if they see the adults in their lives using these tools, it stops being a kid thing and starts being just how we handle hard moments.
Remember Isabella, the 6-year-old leading her whole kindergarten class in a calming ritual? She wasn't born knowing how to do that. Someone taught her. Someone practiced with her. And then she became the one modelling it for everyone else in the room. That's what's possible when we take this seriously early. Thanks for being here for this one. The next time a kid in your life is spiralling, you'll know exactly why a bare breath might be the most powerful thing in the room.